Hello, everybody. Welcome to a training on how to teach grammar. The formula and the model is called PACE. My name is Dave Nielsen, and I work at the Center for Language Studies at BYU. And we will be giving you some examples and some ideas on how to teach grammar today. As I said, the way to teach it is called the PACE model. And so if you follow along with this, it will be available and also some handouts later on. And the PACE, P-A-C-E, has a specific acronym that stands for each one of those steps, and we will go through those together. Before we do that, I'm going to go over the old school model of how I taught at least for 15 years. I was trained in teaching grammar in isolation, meaning that you would take a grammar point and teach that grammar point and then give some grammar examples, give students practice with fill in the blank activities or translations, drill for skill, and then give them an extension activity. And I taught that way forever. I was trained that way when I was going through my methodology class for teaching world language, and I kept that way for years and years. And then I was introduced to teaching grammar in context, or in other words, teaching it in a background or a setting or surrounding a circumstance, and then having the students get more involved in identifying the grammar points. So we'll go through that now with the PACE model. The old school example would be to teach a grammar point, such as comparatives. And so as an example with a comparative is you would teach a cheetah is faster than a deer. All of these are English examples. So you would teach what to add on to the ending, like ER, to add on to that ending, onto the adjective. So a sloth is lazier than a horse. Then you would give students practice, such as fill in the blank. A turtle is blank than a rabbit. Have them come up with slower than a rabbit. And then another way to teach that practice would be translation. A giraffe is taller than a camel, and have the students write out the translation in the target language. Then you would give them some sentences to drill for skill. Write as many of these in 1 minute. So a wolf is meaner than a dog, a bird is smaller than an eagle, a duck is as fun as a goat, a whale is bigger than an elephant, and a cat is nicer than a fox. And then after doing the drill for skill, you would give them an extension writing activity, such as choose one animal and compare it to at least 10 other animals in your writing activity. I'm not opposed to using some of these steps. It's just that we teach it, the grammar point, in a context rather than isolation all by itself. You give them a setting or a background or some surrounding circumstances, and then be able to have them identify some of the ways that the grammar is taught and how it's formed. So moving on to the PACE model are the steps that we have is that you give them a presentation, some kind of presentation we'll talk about in a little bit. And then you have them draw their attention to that particular grammar point, and then asking questions to identify that grammar point. Then you have them co-construct with you the rules for the grammar point, how it forms, what to do to use the grammar, and then to add on an extension activity, which is similar to the old school way. So a presentation that you could give, examples are, I'm going to give you some examples of a personal story that I've used for several years, or a video clip, such as a 3 to 5 video clip from YouTube, using a song or reading a poem or a fable together, and even having them read a short story or a book. In other words, stories that are shorter than a novel, where they could be able to still identify some grammar points. So on step 2, which is drawing their attention, the teacher focuses the student attention on the language form or the structure through the use of images, PowerPoints, songs, or highlighting a particular linguistic form. And that would be one of the keys for them to be able to identify and draw their attention to that particular grammar point. Then together, the teacher and the students co-construct the grammatical explanation, and the teacher will provide scaffolding questions by using questions that guide the students to discover the structure. Students suggest the grammar rules guided by the teacher, making sure they end up with the appropriate explanation. Some of the questions that I have used in the past, drawing attention to the particular story or a song or a video or a poem, is when is the verb used? Is the verb present, past, or future tensed? What is the ending of the verb? How is it different from the perfect tense? Is it used for repeated or one-time activities? And as you notice, those questions all have to do with verbs, but it could be any question that targets that specific grammar point. Then after doing the co-construct, you have them do an extension activity. Students engage in activities in which they have opportunities to use the grammatical structure that they studied. So they could write a personal story, write a conclusion to the story, do information gap activities together with partners, do role play situations, have them pair up and do an interview. You could do a class survey with each other, a simulation, or even some of the cloze activities that we showed you before on the old school way is another way to do an extension activity. Then we do the presentation and the attention one. So an example of this is a personal story that I gave in class at least 100 different times that I called the ice cream truck. And a brief overview of that story was when I was 16 years old, I was hired for my very first job to be an ice cream man. They called me Wally. And I drove around the neighborhood and stopped at elementary schools and at places for the neighborhood where the kids would come running with their quarter to buy their ice cream that they wanted. And I did that for a summer when in my junior year in high school. And I tell that story because there were a couple points there that I used to say all the time about things that I did, and then I did this, and after that I did this, and I would have a sequence on my route that I do every day, and it wouldn't really change, and so I could use a lot of the same sequential story that I would do and use a lot of transitions and a lot of past tense verbs in there. So the way I would do a co-construct with them would be using transitions that they would need to identify in the story, such as first of all, next, then, so, after, however, and, but, when, because, and finally. And I would make sure that I would say those transitional words throughout the story several times so they could hear those and not just isolated sentences that are choppy and all by themselves. Then I would also have them come up with some of the past tense past participles that were used in the story, and that would have them identify and co-construct the grammar. An expansion activity for a story such as this is have the students write their own personal experience about topics such as a trip that they went on that was memorable for them, an accident that they can remember, or some type of an unusual experience. And in the story, they would use 5 to 10 transition words and past participles. And then I would have them draw in the boxes that fit that particular story and that topic so that they could retell the story to their partner without using the written script. In other words, the pictures would be given as the prompts for them to be able to retell the story rather than just reading a story verbatim from a paragraph. Another example is a video. So you would present the video. The one that I used many times in class is called The Cute French Girl. It's about a little 4-year-old girl. It's about 4 minutes long, and she told an imaginary story about Winnie the Pooh and the hippo that was allergic to magic. And she told it in her own words without prodding from anyone else. And so then the students in your class would identify, the presentation would be, you would play that video first, but then they would identify the structure and the grammar that was used, such as the imperfect verb tense, and groups would circle the number of imperfect verbs in the assigned paragraph. The teacher would give each group a different paragraph. Then they would co-construct an explanation of the imperfect verb tense in their groups and how that was formed, and then be able to come back together as a class and identify how the imperfect verb tense was used. As an extension is what I call a BEP story, which is a bizarre or exaggerated or personal story to write an ending to the story, because her story doesn't end. There really is no conclusion. And so the students would come up with their own BEP ending of at least 5 sentences to be able to present to the class. Another way to do a presentation for PACE is to present a song. One that I have used many times is called Je suis tombé. Translation for that would be I fell down. And it's taken from one of the YouTube videos out there. So the way that you would do this is you would play the song and give the students the lyrics of part of the song. And then you would draw attention to the form and the structure using the past tense. Then I would give them example sentences of the past tense, such as j'ai oublié qui j'étais et je suis tombé, which would be translated as I forgot who I was and I fell down. And they would be able to identify some of the grammar examples from the song, from their part of the song that they received, co-construct again as a group how that grammar point is formed and an explanation of how it's structured, and then give them an extension activity such as transcribe the missing words from the other part of the song that they weren't given with the correct past participles. That would be like a closed activity, a fill in the blank. Or another way to do that would be to describe instances in their own life when they have fallen down and what they did afterwards. And that would also be using the past tense in their personal story that they use. Another way to teach the PACE model is through poems. And one that I love is about Victor Hugo's daughter. Her name is Léopoldine. And so the daughter of Victor Hugo, who wrote Les Miserables and Hunchback of Notre Dame, she married a man named Charles Vacquerie on the 15th of February, 1843, but they both drowned together just a few months after they were married when their boat capsized on the Seine River on the 4th of September, 1843. And she was only 19 years old and pregnant, and she died when she was wet, when her wet, heavy skirt pulled her down and her husband died trying to save her. So this tragic event had a great impact on the work and personality of her father, Victor Hugo. He dedicated numerous poems to the memory of his daughter, notably one that was called Demain de l'Aube, which is Tomorrow at Dawn. Victor Hugo didn't write for several years because of the depression he developed following her death. So as you present the poem, you give background information on the poem itself and maybe some background events that happened or surrounding that particular poem, why that writer wrote the poem, to give them some context for the meaning before they even read it. And this is the poem. So tomorrow at dawn, when the countryside is white, I will leave. You see, I know you're waiting for me. I will go through the forest. I will go across the mountains. I cannot stay away from you any longer. I will walk with my eyes fixed on my thoughts without seeing anything outside, without hearing any noise. Alone, unknown, my back bowed, my hands crossed, sad, and the day for me will be like night. I will not look at the evening gold falling, nor the sails in the distance going down to Harfleur. And when I come, I will put on your grave a bouquet of green holly and heather in bloom. So you ask some questions to have them identify meaning rather than grammar first. How do you think Victor Hugo felt it while writing about his daughter's death? How would you feel? What did he mean when he stated, I know you're waiting for me? What do you think the meaning of this poem is? Then you help them draw attention to the grammar. You've already caught the meaning for that poem. And so they identify possibly the future tense or whatever the grammar point is. This is not a presentation on teaching the future tense. It's on a way on teaching grammar in context. So whatever that poem in your language targets and focuses on is what you would teach about that. And then as a class, hopefully come up with how to form it and what the rules would be for forming that particular grammar point. And then an extension activity that I love about a poem is that you write about your short-term future. So that poem was all about the future tense in French. And the future is used several times in the poem. So you could ask them questions like, what majors or minors will you have down the road in school? Where will you live? Who will be your friends? When will you graduate? Will you continue on to graduate school? If so, where? What will be your first job or your career? Who will you marry? What will be your favorite class? And lastly, most important, will BYU beat the U of U in football while you are here at BYU? So those are 15 examples of what you would happen in the next 3 years, possible things that you can use in your own future. And lastly, to teach the PACE model would be using short stories and little books. And when I went to France, I identified many short stories that I could use and went to bookstores and libraries. And so I used these in my class teaching. This one happens to teach the superlative, the grammar point of the superlative, and almost every page of this little story called It's Me, the Strongest, the Most Strong, directly teaching the superlative grammar point. So this one is one way that I taught it, teaching with a little children's book, but and we focused on the meaning. And after they got the meaning, they were able to identify the grammar point. So if you read a short story with the students and have them identify a grammar point as you read the story, example, comparatives and superlatives, instructors give the students grammar points to look for as they read the story, and students identify them with the instructor while reading the story. Example could be comparisons, superlatives, verb tenses, adjective agreements, interrogatives, etc. And then extension activity to have the students write a conclusion to the short story using the emphasized grammar point or create their own short story. And as you can see, many of these examples from the PACE model are giving the opportunity for the students to write their own personal story or to give their own conclusion to the story or to write something that they have a takeaway from that particular presentation that you've given. I hope this has helped you to understand the PACE model, again, which is to present something, to draw attention to the grammar point, to have them co-construct the grammar point with you, and finally to give them an extension activity, hopefully something that's maybe more personable to them, to where they can extend on what you already presented and then have them practice and use that grammar point in context. And thanks for joining me. And we will be posting this onto the YouTube or onto our website that we have for examples.